Let's do that. Okay. We are, let's see, just confirm. Yep, we're recording. Welcome everybody to this Dev Shop Marketing Briefing. I'm Philip Morgan, and I'm here with my special guest, Elliot Murphy.
Hello.
And I want to provide the folks who are here, the folks who are listening later, an opportunity to learn about marketing your services business effectively to a horizontal market. So that's our topic for today. I'm going to interview Elliot. Really, we're just going to talk. I'm going to ask him questions. I'm going to ask him follow-up questions. I'm going to ask him follow-up questions to the follow-up questions. We'll probably talk for 30 to 45 minutes. As we're doing that, if you have questions, I hope you'll drop them in the Q&A window in Zoom. And then when we get to the end of my questions, I'm going to open it up for your questions. And one of the things I can do is promote audience members to panelists, which means you join the video feed with us live, and you can, have a back and forth with Elliot that way, if that's interesting to you. So that's our plan. I've got Elliot for up to 90 minutes if needed, and hopefully we can extract as much wisdom from his experience and knowledge about marketing his business as possible. Elliot, I want to just pause for a minute and let you intro yourself, and then I'm going to do a quick, just sort of setting the context for what a horizontal market is versus a vertical market, and then we'll you and I'll start talking. So take as much time as you need to kind of let people know who you are, and just briefly the sort of transition that your business has gone through over the past couple of years.
Yeah, so our business is only 18 months old, really. So I'm Elliot Murphy. I live in Portland, Maine. And we do, at Kindly Ops, we do security and compliance for the cloud. So unlike some of the other shops or teams who do DevOps, we specifically help people who are doing healthcare, life sciences, that kind of thing, regulated industries. So a typical project is probably starting at $10,000. It's almost always, it is always remote. So our customers are all over North America. They're usually companies that have ambitions to operate internationally, but aren't quite there yet. So they're past Series A. They have paying customers. They have revenue. They have production data, and are growing and trying to keep up with that growth.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to show you all two slides, just talk for a few moments about those, and then Ellie and I will talk more about how he's been able to market himself to that kind of customer, that kind of market.
Sure.
So I'll just share my entire screen. And Elliot, can you let me know if you're seeing
Looks good.
Slide deck? Okay. So there really are two ways that you can structure a market position. And I mean, there's more than two ways, but there's two basic fundamental ways. One is to be some kind of specialist in a vertical market. Well, the other is a generalist. So someone might say, I'm an SEO consultant. And what that means is that they have a skill set, and they are willing to apply that skill set to any market. So in my simplified example here, we've got the manufacturing market vertical, the construction market vertical, retail, and then just, really hundreds, if not thousands, of other market verticals exist. And someone who's a generalist says, well, I can work with any market vertical, and I will do something like SEO for them. The first thing that I recommend people do is pick a market vertical, and that helps move them out of that generalist position. And then they become what I call a vertical specialist. So they've specialized in some market vertical. So let's say that someone decides they're an SEO consultant or an SEO generalist, and they want to focus just on the construction industry. That makes them a vertical specialist because they specialized in a market vertical. And I'm not going to do the whole sales pitch for why you might want to do that or why that's desirable. But it tends to be very beneficial to do that. About 80% of generalist freelancers they need to make this kind of move as they start to specialize. The other 20% can do what Elliot's done, which is to adopt more of a horizontal position with a really focused expertise on some specific problem. And as Elliot suggested, the problem that he's focused on is, regulated data in the cloud is, I guess, how I would phrase that. It's pretty close to what you said.
Totally.
So this slide doesn't represent Elliot's exact position, but it does show you what a horizontal position looks like, because you may apply that expertise to multiple industries, to multiple verticals. So you may be able to apply that expertise to, finance and a bunch of other companies that have that problem. And so that's why I think of it as a horizontal position, because it cuts across multiple industries, multiple market verticals, but it's way more narrow than the generalist position because it's focused on a specific type of problem. Now, this type of position is really only suitable, in my experience, for about 20% of freelancers or small shops or, self-employed people. Because it has a lot of things that are problematic. It's often hard to find your clients when you're focused on the problem and not the type of client. And it takes time. It's challenging to do marketing. And that's why I wanted to talk to Elliot. So that's all I really wanted to say about those two types of general types of market positions. So, Elliot, you gave an example of the type of clients that you worked for, the size of the project, local versus remote. What does the sales cycle tend to look like for this kind of client?
It's super long.
Okay.
Usually 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
At times longer than that.
Longer than you'd like sometimes, probably.
Yeah. So it was interesting, like trying to, I don't know if you want to talk about like all the stuff that went into starting the business, but I was trying to find something that had a longer, like where customers would stick around for longer, rather than just being a 6-week project and being done.
Right.
And this absolutely has that. Working on infrastructure, we have clients that stick around more like 1 to 2 years. And that's wonderful. And the flip side to that is it takes a long time to get started sometimes. And it's mostly about aligning with the right project lifecycle in that company. Like there are windows of opportunity where they're open to taking on an outside team to help make some changes. There's usually outside drivers. And when it lines up, they're happy to work with us. And if they're not starting that project for 6 months or haven't realized they need that project, then we just have to wait.
Okay. I think we'll circle back to this issue because it looks to me like, forgive me for saying this, but it looks to me like you did not graduate from college 18 months ago. You got a little more life experience under your belt than that.
Yeah.
I mean in a good way. So I want to find out, how did you get started working for yourself? Did you work for yourself before T-minus 18 months, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so I barely graduated with an associate's degree.
Nice.
But if I go, like the real story is, I started my first company at 13.
Okay.
I was angry at the government that they wouldn't let me get a regular job. Like child labor laws wouldn't let me bag groceries at the grocery store, and I wanted
All right.
money.
What was your first business?
So my first company was actually systems integration, doing software systems integration for Unix systems.
Wow,
My first client was my orthodontist.
that's amazing.
And I realized like later on that I thought I was charging a ridiculous amount of money, and I was coming in at a quarter of the price of other people in town who were not charging a premium price either. But I was a 13-year-old kid. Got super frustrated with the paperwork part of business, but that gave me a flash of insight. I ran that business for about a year and made some great money for a kid. And it gave me a flash of insight into the power of business and and a sort of approach towards authority and the like regular way of doing things that proved very helpful. And then I went and worked at and did like this skills, I call it a skills building period, where I worked at a bunch of different jobs. And I really liked software and worked at like for 20 years in a variety of jobs building software companies.
Okay.
Um, and then 8 years ago, I tried starting a development agency with my brother,
Uh-huh.
and it blew up in our face, like
Uh,
badly. It took me several years to dig out of the financial crater that left.
oh my
Our
gosh.
first client engagement just went very, very badly. I made some normal beginner mistakes with the business, and it took a long time to recover from. And then about 18 months ago, I was working for a small startup that I was really, really passionate about, and I got laid off. I actually laid myself off and
Hmm.
half the team. We were trying to figure out how to save the company. I was like, one thing I can do is take my salary out of the mix.
Hmm.
Um, and if I go back actually 3 years, like I was really frustrated that I wasn't making very much money working at this startup that I cared about their mission. And my daughter needed braces. And so the deep, deep fear and shame that I carried from the previous failed business was finally overpowered by anger about not being able to buy my daughter braces. And I started freelancing just as a total generalist. Hey, like,
Uh-huh.
CTO for hire, right? Is the
Right.
classic like green freelancer sort of, hey, so other people must need technical experts. So I freelanced a little bit, moonlighting,
Uh-huh.
and then getting laid off sort of was pushed off the building, right? And so
Yeah.
then the anger turns to like full blown terror about like, okay, now my family's going to lose its house. I need to get over every single thing I'm afraid of. And I have two choices. I can move to Silicon Valley or New York or something like that. I live in Portland, Maine. Um, or rather than uprooting my whole family and like separating everyone, I can start a business and try again. And that is when I really thought hard about like what are the shapes of different businesses and what sort of characteristics are typical for those businesses and what are the revenue cycles for those businesses. Like stack of books as high as my ceiling and just terror like scribbles on the walls. And I had some healthcare experience and I had some systems infrastructure experience, and
Okay.
I just attempted to leverage every single thing I had ever learned into this particular position. And it's 18 months later, and I'm still alive. So it's working so far. It feels like we're very early in the journey. And it's been a real challenge. All of the challenges you said are absolutely true.
Yeah.
But it can work.
I'm imagining the sort of FBI serial killer investigation wall where they've got all the photos up and all the
That's it.
strings connecting. So what led you to? Well, actually, so when you were CTO for hire, did you do anything to market yourself, or were you kind of working locally and using local connections?
So that was in sort of in the local startup ecosystem.
Okay.
And so I was doing that moonlighting, and I would ask around so people would have a little bit of angel money and they'd want to build a product. And so I was sort of contracting with people who needed some programming help, getting a proof of concept together. No
Okay.
product market fit, no verification that their idea was reasonable,
Yeah.
but they just wanted to spend some money for someone to program something that worked.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So what led you? I mean, you said you had a background in medical or healthcare, background in
Yeah.
what led you to this current specialization?
So for 20 years, I did infrastructure. I worked on databases and file systems and web services, um, operating systems, things like that.
Mhm.
And then I joined a healthcare startup, and it was bootstrapped, no venture capital. It was actually started by a patient. They never set out to start a software company, but but ended up realizing like that's the way they were going to be able to change how care was delivered. And through that, I was exposed to all of these brilliant scientists and researchers at universities, who knew how to save lives,
Mm-hmm.
and realized like the current state of affairs as far as what is actually being practiced is 12 to 15 years behind what is known and proven by scientific research. And I saw firsthand like the struggles that I had with regulatory burden and the struggles that the company founders had. And all of these scientists who were not going and starting companies and bringing their innovations to the market to save lives because it was so intimidating and there was so much FUD around regulatory burden.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was laid off from that, I was realizing like there's this huge, huge need. There's money being wasted and there is innovation not happening because everybody's stressed out about the paperwork and the laws and how to keep things safe
Mm-hmm.
in the cloud, right? Like Pokemon runs in the cloud, but you can't possibly run your healthcare records in the cloud. And that was the story I was hearing over and over again,
Mm.
even though I was doing it at this little startup and I knew it could be done.
When you say you were hearing it over and over again, like from who? Were you doing some kind of formal research process or just talking to people?
No, not really organized, but like I would
Mm-hmm.
go. I cared about healthcare, and so I would go to healthcare conferences, and I would
Mm-hmm.
hear people talking about like, oh yeah, I wish a big company would do this. I can't go try it because of this. Or you would hear even big companies say like, oh yeah, we can't do these neat things that would make it really easy for people to interact with their information because it's not secure.
Mm.
I would talk to the researchers at the universities and just hear their stories about like, yeah, we can't get the $11 billion that we would need in order to possibly run a product that deals with medical data. So we're just not going to go take this brilliant insight to the market.
How long did it take you to see that pattern?
It probably took a couple of years.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. Um, can you kind of contextualize for people? I'm going to play devil's advocate. So this sounds so boring, like the whole idea of regulation. And like, can you contextualize for people? Is that something you would call yourself passionate about or excited about, or you know what I mean? Like emotionally, how is that for you to be interested in that?
Yeah. So when is a job meaningful? When does your work actually matter?
Right.
So at the point in time when I was looking for work and didn't have my next mortgage payment in the bank, I was trying to figure out what makes a good business. And part of that was, where am I going to have a lot of competition from other people trying to underbid me?
Okay.
Where am I going to provide value to a company? And so part of that is, what is the terrible work? What is the boring work? What is I wanted the office cleaning work of software. I wanted the janitorial work of software. And what brings honor to it is the fact that I'm creating jobs, not only for myself, but also for my community. And that gets very, very exciting. Like looking at business as an engine that can contribute good to the community. It's about so much more than the actual work that I'm doing.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I knew it was terrible going into it, right? I knew this was the worst of the worst work. I wanted work that if I showed the company engineers exactly how to do it, what tools we used, every single thing, full transparency, they would be like, that's very nice. We'd still like you to do it. Exactly like the office cleaning company showing the legal team at the lawyer's office exactly how they clean everything. They're like, that's very nice. We don't want to cleaners on our staff. You can have that contract for a very long time.
That's really interesting because a lot of the times, even I'll admit, even myself, when I'm thinking about what creates value for clients, we sort of sex up what creates value for clients and we make it seem like it's glamorous.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about something that does create value, but it's kind of the opposite of glamorous,
mm-hmm.
which I think is super interesting.
So one of the jobs I had after shutting down my first business, I was 15 or 16, I went and worked for a septic tank company.
Uh-huh.
And my job was literally to clean portable toilets that had been dumped over by teenagers all all of the human waste and everything, or to go to car dealers or restaurants or sometimes houses and clean out septic tanks. So we're talking like two guys in a truck with a 3-inch hose going and dealing with thousands of gallons of human waste. And those bills got paid, and there was no negotiation over price. And that is not a discretionary purchase.
Yeah.
You are the right person for that job. And I didn't want the business to be a discretionary purchase, right? So like the life cycle of the project has to line up with when the company needs a new vendor or needs to take on a project. But it's not a thing that they're deciding whether or not to spend money on a marketing campaign. If their data in the cloud goes away, they don't have a company.
Did you see other sort of dirty jobs that are really valuable or have sort of outsized value when you were thinking about your company? Were there other ideas that you looked at and rejected, maybe?
There weren't other ideas that I rejected that had this same attribute. Like there were lots of ideas that I sort of filtered out. But so the other thing that seemed really interesting was like building the products. And so we still write a lot of code.
Yep.
But we draw a line that we do not build product features. We build stuff that makes your product run and makes it run safely. And that I felt like the domain expertise for a particular startup varied a lot between different companies. Whereas this infrastructure layer, much like a plumber, like it actually there was a deep vein to mine there. And every single thing that we learn on one job, we can apply to the next job. And there's actually a tremendous amount of commonality between what we do. So it turned out to be much more specialist even than I realized.
So when you said, okay, this is probably it, this, taking care of data in the cloud from an infrastructure perspective and a compliance perspective, did you have all those skills already? Were you like ready to go, or did you have to kind of do some growth to get there?
Tons of growth.
And I'm not talking, we kind of skipped over the fact that you have hired, 5 people since you started?
Yeah, the team kind of flexes depending on how much work we have on at the time.
Okay, sure.
We've gone as high as 7 people, and now we're a little bit smaller today.
Right,
but
which is smart. I've heard that's one of the mistakes an agency makes, is not letting go of people to adjust for the natural up and down of.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah. Anyway, but you've grown headcount, but I'm asking, did you have to grow your skills or your comfort level with anything to get to where you could see the company going at that time when you had the idea for the business?
Absolutely. And so there are some legal barriers that get put up. Having certain types of insurance. I found that, so like a very specific stage that I went through was going from a freelancer who has sort of come to terms with the idea of charging people money and transitioning to a company who can negotiate with lawyers at the other company as a company, not as an individual.
Right.
And say, you know what, these IP terms are not acceptable. We won't do it that way. And these guarantees and indemnities that you're asking for are ridiculous. And here is the $5 million of insurance that we can cap things to.
Yeah.
And just like negotiating as a company. And so that's terrifying, right? Like trying to figure out how to get the insurance company to issue things, pass the security clearances, acquire some certifications, hire someone who you know is smart and go like, I need you to get certification X, Y, and Z. And just sort of figuring that out. But I had been in the software business long enough that I knew it was possible to acquire skills. And so I knew all of this stuff was possible, and I had nothing else to lose, right? It was like a position where finally all of the self-doubt was overridden by this necessity to just go out and make it happen.
I have that too. And I think it has to do with when you say to yourself, I mean, it doesn't always look this way, but when you say to yourself, if I don't do something, I'm going to lose this house. If you're saying that, you're probably ready to embrace some serious changes in your life.
Mhm.
So that's interesting. Let's kind of get down to the marketing side of this. So how do you market yourself now? And I'll have
So
tons of specific follow-up questions, but what in broad strokes, how do you do it?
yeah, step one was putting up a website. So when I was cold calling people in my network and they went to look at the website, they were reassured that it was real. Um,
How fancy was that, the website?
that was a $20 theme forest template with
Nice.
some testimonials copied and pasted from LinkedIn.
Cool. Okay. Company name,
Yep.
that kind of thing.
So the company logo, I got 2 or 3 jobs on Fiverr. They were terrible except for one, so I went with the one that
Okay.
was
The logo
better.
could probably cost you $30, something
Yep,
like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then the company name, my wife and I were driving down the street and we're like, oh, right, I guess things are pretty risky right now. So I guess we're gonna try starting a company. And we're trying to come up with a name driving down the road. I love boats and I love the idea of resilience rather than happiness as a goal.
Uh-huh.
And so kindly is a way to describe a boat that is very forgiving to the operator and can overcome a lot of rough seas and things like that. So kindly opposite it was.
Great. Okay. So you had the website, you did cold calling. How did that go?
Um, I learned how to deal with rejection, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I started figuring out how to size up a company from the outside about whether or not they were likely to be in a place where they had budget to be spent on what I had to offer.
You
And
said, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
so the trick I found was looking for jobs. I had done this trick previously for trying to figure out companies' product strategy,
Uh-huh.
but it works for sometimes for figuring out what budget they have as well. And that's to look at their open job positions, both now and what they've had posted over the last 6 months.
Any
Um,
particular sources that were valuable for that? I know LinkedIn has job postings. Anything else?
LinkedIn's pretty terrible.
Okay.
It was more like trying to find. So LinkedIn can help you figure out who are some managers in the company, and then the company website itself will have some job listings, and you can
Mhm.
kind of tell from that whether they take it seriously or not.
Okay.
And
So,
then I would look and see where else are people working at that company trying to attract applicants to those positions,
okay.
and just go after those companies. They're trying to spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on hiring people to do this work. So that's a good company to talk to.
Okay. Let's take a step back and give some context here. So you're kind of just briefly describe the perfect client for you.
So the perfect client has a software team of 10 engineers or more. And so they are running software that they've written,
Mhm.
and that software runs in the cloud and processes regulated data. So it's healthcare records, it's cancer research, it could be financial services. I find that even more boring, but it could be financial services.
Okay.
But that's the shape of it. We're helping software teams who are struggling to keep their systems and data safe while they're growing.
So that's a little more narrow than any potential company, which helps,
Absolutely.
right? Is there some list where you can go look these companies up, or did you have to do you have to do all this kind of nitty gritty list building yourself to identify good prospects?
Um, there are a few places that I identified like some signal. There's no list, right?
Yeah.
There never is a perfect list.
Yeah.
One place I looked was for venture capital firms who had a specific investing focus, and I would look for companies that they had recently invested in, and by recently I mean the last 18 months. Like calling the day after somebody announces an investment is a sure way to get ignored.
Yeah, because they're getting dozens or hundreds of those very same kind of calls, right?
Yeah. And then once I found one company that was interesting, so in particular, there's a few companies that do integrations with a set of other companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're sort of like a clearinghouse.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would look at their customer lists, right? Their
Mm-hmm.
testimonials and their social proof. I'm like, oh, okay, well, here's another set of companies I can go after.
Okay, so if we kind of abstract that into a particular tactic, you are talking about looking for companies that work with your ideal clients who either because of SEC regulation are forced to divulge their business relationship, or they do it voluntarily through things like customer lists or testimonials or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
And job postings factor into that too, right? So
right.
like I would search for DevOps engineer HIPAA, and
Mm-hmm.
boom, that's all of the companies who are trying to hire people to do operations work, and they need to know something about HIPAA compliance.
So, okay, you're talking now about, I'm guessing there's at least a half dozen places you're kind of pulling data from, if not more. How do you manage that?
So I'd make a list, and I would look for companies that seems to have a culture that I would enjoy working with,
Mm-hmm.
right? They seem to be a little more modern. So I'd filter some out that way.
Right.
And then I would look for like indicators that they were healthy and growing,
Okay.
that I could buy into what they were doing. And then I would just get in touch and ask.
Okay. Did you use like just a spreadsheet to manage all this activity, or a
Yeah,
CRM or
not
something?
even as formal as a spreadsheet, just a notes file.
Nice. Okay. I mean, feel free to be as vague as you'd like about this, but how big of a market is the market that you are trying to reach?
I wish more companies would would like work in here. There's no way that I can even scratch the surface. It
Right.
still feels like it's not nearly narrow, and I have not narrowed nearly enough.
Yeah. Yeah. What did so okay, so let are we all the way through kind of mapping out how you market? So there was some cold calling at least at first. You're collecting, kind of building your own list of potentially good clients. You have your $20 website with your
Yeah.
$30 logo. What else?
So that's how I got started, and
Okay.
then I started trying to speak. So I would say I haven't even finished doing the things that I think I should be doing for marketing.
Okay.
Um,
You're still kind of building out a plan or
Still kind of building
yeah.
out, right? So step one is getting some clients who pay you, right? And so that's just brute force,
Yeah.
direct outreach.
Yeah.
I've tried for a few months doing a more formal outbound campaign.
Okay.
That has not generated any results. So
Uh-huh.
that's it. Um, and I, over the last year, have put a lot of energy into speaking, and that has generated great results.
Okay, let's talk more about that one then.
Yeah.
What was your first speaking engagement, I guess, or gig?
So I started doing local regional meetups and just
Mhm.
presenting on something I knew something about
Okay.
or something I had learned. And from there, started applying to larger and larger conferences, getting a lot of rejection.
Hmm.
And then finally got accepted at a bigger conference, big enough that they were going to be recording the talk.
Okay.
And then started using that talk video in my applications to other conferences, and it sort of snowballed from there. I would say I still get rejected from 75% of the conferences I submit to. Um,
Did
but
you did you get rejected less after you had that video that was proved that you you were a decent speaker, a competent speaker, or maybe a good speaker?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. So that helped with the rejections. Okay. Portland, Maine. What are the sort of major? Is geography an issue when it comes to speaking? I guess is what I'm getting at.
Um, it is. So like I've spoken in London, in the other side of the country in Oregon,
Hmm. Hmm.
a lot more in Boston.
Hmm.
So I first started like with the nearest big city, and
Okay.
then tried to go more national.
Okay.
It takes a lot of time, right? So it's like it takes a huge time commitment, but it has been the single biggest way that I've gotten into like to introduced to companies who I later do business with.
So if you had to, for some reason, you had to like eliminate all other marketing activities, would speaking be the last one you would eliminate? Would that be the one that you would focus on if you had to just eliminate everything else?
For me personally, yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
Um, there are two other things that I'm just getting started with and haven't got off the ground. One is starting a podcast, and the
Hmm.
other is putting together a course.
Okay.
And so the reason I want to do those things is first not because of marketing, but I believe that it will be helpful with marketing.
Hmm.
I want the knowledge of how to of of how to do good work in this area to be available to people who don't have the money to be my clients. So I want that information to be available for free to everyone. And if they're trying to go faster and they have the money, then I'm happy to take people as clients. But when people are earlier stage and can't hire us, I want to teach them how to do this.
I would call that a type of generosity. Some people would call it passion. Do you feel like that matters? Do you think that gets better results for you because you genuinely want to educate people?
I don't know. That's definitely an approach I have. I want
Mhm.
every interaction that I have with people to be, I want them to come away feeling like they're more equipped
Mhm.
to tackle the challenges that they're facing,
Mhm.
whether or not they ever become a client.
Yeah.
So it's important to me that I interact with people in that way.
Right.
I have no idea how to evaluate if that costs me business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're probably too close to it anyway. I think it probably helps. Is my peanut gallery observation. Let's talk a little bit more about this speaking. I assume your first conference talk was terrifying.
They're
Was it?
still terrifying.
Oh, they're still terrifying, and you still you're still willing to do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
They have amazing leverage.
Okay.
Uh,
Why is
So
that?
like I got a company approaching me out of the blue 3 years after I did an interview like this, just recorded that was
Hmm.
published on HIPAA compliance,
Hmm.
and a startup out of Russia was trying to do something to help people with mental health
Hmm.
and saw this video and they came and hired us to do some small work. They're smaller than a normal client we would work with, but
Hmm.
I really liked what they were doing. And like they just showed up out of the blue 3 years after that video. I never tried to promote that video anywhere. I didn't even know where it was. And they showed up. And so like people watch video and they learn things
Hmm.
and like my terror and work stops after I give the talk, and that still exists as an asset that is available for other people.
Right. Right. How did you choose topics for your talks?
So in the beginning I was trying to talk about things that I thought were interesting or that I was an expert in,
Okay.
and now I look at a conference that has an audience that I'd like to reach.
Okay.
And ultimately, speaking is an act of manipulation. There's a lot of like that carries a lot of responsibility with it, right? You
Yeah.
shouldn't be giving a talk unless you want to change how people think about something.
Okay.
And so first I look at an audience, and the two main audiences I talk to are peers, fellow practitioners, and um, people who are in a market that I want, like who would be a good client for my
Okay.
services. So that those
Right.
are very different audiences. One's very
Sure.
business heavy and one is very engineering heavy. Um, and then I look at the conference, and I greatly prefer single track conferences that have an attendee list of 200 to 300, because I want to be talking to people. I want it to be a conference where people are able to interact with the speakers.
Hmm.
And then I try and think of, out of this theme that this audience, this conference panel is trying to present to this audience, is there something useful that I could contribute that meshes with that?
Hmm.
And so I come at it from it, rather than starting with me, now I start with them. Like, how could I contribute to this experience that they're trying to create? And then
Okay.
do I have an opinion? And if I can't come up with like, I think I could usefully contribute and I have an opinion, then I don't submit to that conference. But it's that recipe so far has worked pretty well.
Do you try to be controversial in the opinion that you put in front of people, or polarizing, or a troublemaker, or anything like that? Or
Not
do you just kind of go with what feels natural?
I try to actually have an opinion,
Uh-huh.
but I don't deliberately try and make it a controversial opinion.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
I try as much as possible to discover and point people towards expertise and lived experience that's available from other fields.
Hmm.
So a lot of times people working in technology can feel like this is all brand new. And I try very hard to mine other fields for like experience that is totally relevant and applicable, even though it's in a book from 30 years ago.
Nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah.
So, what's the one thing that's made you you a more effective speaker? Not necessarily like from a Tony Robbins perspective of being like an impressive speaker, but more effective at generating leads.
More effective at generating leads has been to actually like be more explicit about sharing my contact information.
Okay.
So it's so basic, so vanilla, right? But
Yeah.
there was a while when I was giving talks, and like on the last slide for 10 seconds, I'd have something, some way to get in touch with me.
Uh-huh.
I'd mumble it and fast forward past it. And now I have my contact info on the bottom of every single slide because I want people who are watching that video later to be able to get in touch with me. So
Right.
like the sort of technical person, like stereotypical engineer approach is like, I don't want anybody to get in touch with me, keep my email address secret, how did you get my contact info?
Right.
And facing the reality of sales, it's like, if someone wants to talk to me, I want them to talk to me. And so it's just like totally different mindset of broadcasting my contact info.
Got it. Okay. So you mentioned outbound is either not working or taking time to yield results. Are there other things you tried that just didn't work or were ineffective for the kind of horizontal market position that you're in?
Um, no, so it's been like targeted outreach, which has had some success
Hmm.
that I've been doing personally, and then like broader outbound campaigns have had less success. Um, I want to do more of the like podcast and course. Oh, I want to
Hmm.
do a podcast and course
Yeah.
to to do more of an inbound program.
Okay. So those are experiments yet to be done.
Yep.
How do you measure results with your marketing, or do you measure results?
No, so it's not super formal, but
Mhm.
I look at like how much time am I spending over over several months. So I try not to look at it for like less than a quarter at a time, but basically like how much time and money am I spending? And then overall, how do I feel that that's contributing to a whole bunch of stuff? Our expertise, our reputation, our ability to deliver work to existing clients, new leads coming in, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's a very
Yeah.
subjective thing, and I just try and think big picture. Like, is this moving us forward, or is it hard? Is it really not? And it's hard to see any benefit.
It sounds like you do carve out some time to sort of reflect on the whole business, the marketing on a quarterly basis.
The existential dread comes without a schedule.
Okay. You're like, okay, I really need to sit down and have some me in the business time.
Yeah, like, and that's just part of my personality, I guess. Like
Yeah.
I'm perpetually zooming way out and trying to think about like what is the story that is being told about my life,
Uh,
and is it going in a direction that I'm okay with?
yeah. Yeah. As you get older, you kind of start to think about your legacy and how you're going to be remembered almost.
Right.
Not that you're that old, Elliot, but anyway, I don't think a lot of 20-year-olds think in those terms.
It weighs on you after a while, right? You can't help but think about that stuff.
So I meant to ask you this about the speaking. If you had to formalize how much time that takes, how much time do you have to spend on that? However you want to define the time frame.
Um, it takes usually 2 to 3 days to deliver a talk if I have to travel, right? So like you lose at least 2 days to travel, and then that whole day is shot. And then if you decide to go to the rest of the conference, then that might be a couple more days.
Yep.
Um, I usually spend a few days, like a couple of sessions, like an afternoon, a couple of times each quarter, looking for conferences to apply to. One thing that's kind of frustrating is that the call for papers is so early,
Mm-hmm.
getting earlier and earlier. So
You
I
mean a long lead time?
for the spring.
Okay, got it.
So that's 6 months. So that's like trying to figure out what would be an abstract that would be appealing for that conference. And then you get notified like 3 months later. And if you get accepted for a conference, then it's like a couple of weeks of low grade worry in the background. And then as the conference, comes up, then, a day or two of like really intense preparation and sort of crystallizing all of those ideas that were rattling around.
So how many talks do you give a quarter, roughly?
This quarter has been my busiest. I've done 4 this quarter. I think I am going to try not to do any January, February, March, and then I'm going to try and do 2 or 3 good ones next year.
Okay. So 1 or 2 a quarter on average over the year. And sounds like 3 days per conference, maybe a total. It sounds like a week per conference between the prep and the doing. So that's 2 weeks a year that you're spending, 2 weeks a quarter roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just want to put that in concrete terms for people. So it's a real commitment, but also it's your number one most effective marketing channel.
It is. Like my favorite story is a client I'm working with now. I almost canceled going to the conference. I was like, why do I put in the effort?
Yeah.
And I walk off stage and there was a line of 3 or 4 people to talk to me. I'm like, oh, that's very lovely. Like, people are glad that I came. This is how I feel better.
Uh-huh.
And the guy in the back waited for everybody to be done. And then he's like, could you come help us at our company? And they turned into one of the most exciting clients I've had all year.
Yeah, that's pretty good return on investment.
Yeah.
because with the kind of projects you're talking about, that could be, you mentioned that you like clients to be multi-year clients, recurring. Yeah. Okay. So I want to get to audience questions soon. Corey, I'm going to get to your question, and Leon, I'm going to get to your question. I want to also encourage people to ask any and all questions they have. We've got Elliot for another 40 minutes.
Can I add something that didn't work?
Oh, I'd love that. And then the next thing I'm going to ask you, just so you know, is like, how would you kind of sum this up? What's the advice you would give to others who are doing marketing in some kind of horizontal position? But yes,
Yeah.
what didn't work?
So a thing that I've put some time and money into is trying to set up partnerships, like formal partnerships with other people, like other vendors, infrastructure vendors.
Right.
Like people who, for example, who have like a SaaS market monitoring product.
Right. Yeah, sort of like referral things or.
Yeah. So some revenue share based on the fact that like I'm in a trusted position with a client. They need a tool that does this thing. And
right.
So I only do those with tools that are absolutely my preference to use anyway. But at the scale that I'm currently at, which is less than $1 million a year, less than 10 million a year for sure. Trying to do those formal partnership arrangements has not made any sense. I've gotten 0 return from that. It sounds super appealing, like, oh yeah, I'm a partner with this recognizable name and this recognizable name and that one, but it's just like, it hasn't worked. I think we need to be 10 times bigger before those would really start to make sense.
The way you described it, you would be selling their tool and getting a cut of the revenue, right?
Exactly.
Do they send you leads for accounts that they sell into but need implementation help?
No, so that was what I got wrong. That's what I had imagined channel look like, but they're looking to qualify you, like, how much business can you bring us, and then we'll give you a cut of that.
Interesting. So that's why the scale matters, is you need to be 10x the scale you are now for that to start to make sense.
Yeah. So for example, one partner that I was just talking with last week, they're like, in order for this to be really interesting for us at an entry level, you need to be doing $25,000 a month in license fees for this service.
Got it.
I'm like, okay, well, that's a whole different tier than I'm currently at.
Yeah.
I can see how that would make sense, but it's
Yeah.
just I shouldn't have spent all that time on partnerships
Yeah.
in this early stage of the business.
Yeah, I can see that working. I mean, not to be like, it's all 2020 hindsight, but I can see that working with some startup that needs to get traction and they're in the same market you are. And so they're willing to take anybody as a partner, even if they're a small company. I can see that maybe that working, but I also see the flaw that you identified in it. Leon asks how much time you spend working on your business versus in the business, right? How would you quantify that?
It has really fluctuated over this first 18 months. So
Mm-hmm.
it started as I was working overtime in the business in order
Mm-hmm.
to try and generate enough cash to hire the second person.
Yeah.
And then sleepless nights and weekends, right, are our strategy, survival
Right.
mode.
Right.
The last 3 months.
When you're at your best, right? You're doing that business strategy.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
kidding.
The last 3 months, it's been I'd say roughly a day a week of actually just like taking time to go think about the business or to go do
Okay.
things that are for the business rather than working in the business. It's for like, I have a hard time classifying sales work as
Yeah.
whether is that working in the business or on the business. I think it's working in the business.
Well, I guess when you're the business owner, it kind of is both, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I see what you mean. So about 20% of the time on
Yeah.
average is sort of working on the business time.
And my goal is like what I want in my career is to transition from a hands-on engineering practitioner to a business owner.
Yeah.
I'm interested in owning multiple businesses.
Yeah.
I'm very, very fascinated with the impact that a business and like a B Corp type of business in particular can have on society.
Yeah.
And so I'm a long way from that goal, but I'm trying to work towards spending more and more time working on business rather than in business.
That's great. But you got to get a cigar and a pocket watch to do that.
Right.
I'm kidding. I mean, that's the perception. I say that because a lot of freelancers, I think, get into it for the love of craft, and that can kind of turn into a glass ceiling for them if they're not kind of willing to embrace that business owner role the way you're talking about.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be about the money in your pocket. It can be about like for me, a thing that's super interesting is whether I can create some jobs in this place that doesn't have many jobs.
Yep. Yep. Okay, Corey, we're gonna turn to your question, and Corey, what I'm going to do is promote you to a panelist. Ta-da! You don't have to. You can like mute your video camera or whatever, but I just want to give you the opportunity to interact with us. Hey, Corey.
Hey, Corey.
You're muted. I think that's probably by default.
No, thank you. Sorry about that.
Hey, Corey. Well, you're here. I'll just let you run your question live for Elliot, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy.
Sure, sounds completely reasonable. I guess the question I have is, for you, what does an engagement look like? Do you start off with a small project? Do you wind up doing a roadmap and discovery project as a part of that? And then once you wind up getting past that into your full offering, do you wind up providing strategy, such as an assessment of where they are and a roadmap of where to get better? Or do you focus on implementation?
So initially, I was pretty vague and unopinionated. And today, the only way I work with someone is by doing an initial assessment. So it's really a road mapping discovery. I call it an infrastructure risk assessment. And that proves that they can send $1 from their company to my company, which disqualifies some very strange companies, some of them quite large, right? But like that's a really important hurdle that I found I needed to put in place. I put that in place after doing a month of work for someone and them refusing to pay. And so we have to do an initial assessment first. It's fixed price. It's usually $10,000. It varies a little bit depending on whether they want an on-site executive briefing or not. And then that gives us a couple of things. That lets us see behind the curtain and whether or not we want to work with these people, like how dysfunctional is the company, how wonderful is the company, and whether or not they want to work with us. Like they understand our approach and our philosophy towards things and the recommendations that we're making. They can take those recommendations and they can have their own team work on them. They can have us do project work, right? And we're happy to do that. Or they can just put it in the file and ignore it. And all three of those outcomes are totally okay with us. In a rare case, we might choose not to do any further work with them.
Okay. When you talk about implementation, though, and let's say they wind up wanting you to do the project work, is that something you do internally? Is that something you sub out? Is that something you hand off to another agency entirely and let them white glove it while you just wind up more or less collecting a percentage of it? And how does that wind up getting structured?
I have been trying to do it all myself. And a thing that has been really hard is trying to do it with employees rather than subcontractors. I'm exploring using more subcontractors, but I think that I would prefer to use employees if I can, like whenever I can. I don't refer to other agencies. Like I will refer I don't refer to other agencies and collect a percentage, right? Like if we're not going to be able to handle the work, like I'll gladly refer you to somebody that I trust who can handle the work, but I don't try and do any percentage.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
I had a second question, if that's all right with you. I don't want to take other people's time if there's a backlog of questions.
It's okay with me, but I do want to do this. I want to ask Elliot if he's okay with sharing the story of how is his pricing. Elliot, you told me a story one time about you did this first risk assessment and you were just like delighted. And then you told some friend about it. Can you tell that story? Do you know the one I'm talking about?
They were just shocked. They had paid like 5 to 10 times more and gotten something that was like, oh, this is terrible, that we're just going to put it in the file and we wish we hadn't wasted the money.
And that gave you the confidence to increase the price you charge for that risk assessment, right?
Absolutely.
That's great. Okay. Yes. Corey, take it away with more questions. We've got another one from Leon, but I think we'll be able to get to that in the time we have.
Sure. I'm in a somewhat similar space. My business is starting to look a lot like aspects of yours. One thing you mentioned earlier that resonated was that you said, I was hoping to give more detail into how outbound lead generation works for you, or more astutely, how it doesn't. You alluded to that not being ideal. So how has it failed?
So there's I think a perfect example. There's a company that I would like to work with, and like they have money, they have a product that I like, they have a need, they're scaling, like they're right on. And we happened to try 2 different approaches with the same company. And so we did research on who different people were at the company, product managers, technical people, and ran an outbound email campaign. And we got the same type of things that you get normally. You get some bounces, you get some unsubscribes, delete my email, how'd you get my contact info? And then you get one from a product manager, and he was like, thanks for the offer. We have all of our DevOps needs completely cared for. We don't need you at all. So a really thoughtful, firm no. The exact same day, I went and looked at their website, and they had a DevOps engineer job open. And I had asked a previous client who was in the same town for a referral to their CTO. So he did a double opt-in referral. So the CTO says, yes, please, I really want to meet these people. So the same day, we got this totally convinced no from inside the organization, and a yes, please, I really want to work with these people. I want to meet them. I want to talk to them. The next week, they announced another $20 million round of investment funding. So the lesson that I take from that is that if you're not talking to people at the right level in the organization, they're not like giving themselves permission, organizationally or personally, to think more broadly about solving problems. And they're just working on marching orders. And their marching orders didn't include go find a consulting company to hire. Whereas someone working at the exec level has the context of company strategy and an overall budget and is used to making discretionary trade-offs with how they spend their resources. They understand it costs me this much in recruiter fees to hire an engineer. I can put this many people on it, and the opportunity cost of that is not working on these other features. And I have this presentation I have to make to the board where they're beating me up about risk and compliance. And they can go like, oh, you have experience. We can change the budget. Let's talk about what you do and how you can help our company move forward with your expertise. And like fundamentally, your value offer has to be like helping a company increase revenue and reduce cost and risk. And so ours is fundamentally about reducing cost and risk. One of the costs being they go out of business, right? That's the risk with this stuff. And like that is just a totally different conversation with the exec who I've not been able to get to through a cold approach. That is a much more targeted, like finding a way to get into their field of vision.
Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Leon has a question. Corey, I'll leave you as a panelist in case you have any follow-ups. But Leon has a question. You ask for payment all up front, or do you break it up somehow? And Leon shares a story about, the kind of thing you would think spurs that question of not getting paid the right way you want to, et cetera. So how do you do payment, Elliot?
Yeah, so I ask for payment all up front for the initial assessment. Yep. And then if we're going to do like long-term ongoing project work, I do like the sort of normal industry, like it's going to be this much per month and it's net 30. And then sometimes customers will bulk at the upfront payment and ask to do 50 now, 50 later, 50% later, and with that.
Okay. Did you always do it that way, or did you transition to that at some point?
No, I had to get much more strict about that after just like realizing it wasn't right to take on all of the risk and to spend money and resources on things that weren't as committed on their side. So I think lots of companies do this approach. Some very large software companies with many hundreds of employees, they phrase it very, very smoothly about like when the invoice is set. So I was looking at one earlier this week, and one that I liked was for an assessment, the invoice is sent when you decide to purchase the assessment. For fixed fee services, the invoice is sent when you purchase. For variable fee services, right, like this ongoing maintenance stuff, you want 50 hours a month or whatever, then that's net 30. And it seems to work.
That's great. Any other questions from those who are here? Going once, going twice. Thanks, Leon.
Yeah, one more follow-up as well.
Sure.
I guess my question is again, I started off myself as DevOps consultancy in general, and then wound up having to niche way further down than that to distinguish myself. What did that path look like for you as you became more and more narrowly focused on compliance?
I still don't think I'm niched down far enough, right? So like right now I say it's regulated industries only. And so that's healthcare, life sciences, and some finance. I would prefer to be like only healthcare, only mental health, like only behavioral health, like only behavioral health with a specific clinical approach. But I'm just not there yet. Like,
what would be the benefit, you think, of going that narrow?
I would really enjoy helping those companies.
Okay. So it's kind of like a values match, or yeah.
So there's so much in what I'm doing with my business. There is so much that is subjective and fuzzy and murky. around this idea of a dual bottom line. Like this whole B Corp idea, right? That there is making enough money to stay afloat and be responsible financially. And then there is, what sort of discretion do I have to try and influence things happening in the world? And that's what I'm really excited about. And so I'm willing to make a lot of sacrifices or do things that are more difficult or less appealing on the financial side, because what I want is the discretion to do that. There's this great story they just started this new magazine. I think it's called the B Corporation magazine, but they have this story about a restaurant or some sort of food preparation business, and they redesigned their kitchen to be less efficient. And so like the idea of a B Corporation is that there is a financial bottom line, that like there's fiduciary responsibility, and also a social impact or like mission based bottom line. And you are allowed to consider both of those. And so the reason they changed the kitchen food prep process to be less efficient is because that would create more simpler jobs that could be fulfilled by lower skilled people. So it was going to cost them more, but part of their mission was to create local jobs that could be filled by less skilled people. And so that was a business success, like deliberately pessimizing that process. And that's where stuff gets really, really interesting.
Oh, it's fascinating. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Elliot, can you make sure that you spend the next minute telling people where they can contact you if they have follow-up questions or just are curious to sort of put your business under the microscope and see what it looks like to them?
Absolutely. I'm happy to answer questions from anyone. Folks who are watching this later, I'm totally happy to answer questions. I don't necessarily have magical insights to anything, right? This is just my experiences so far. It's Elliot, ELLIOT @kindlyops.com.
Okay. Well, Elliot, I want to thank you so much. This is the kind of experience that you've sort of, experienced firsthand and fought your way through and gained through sleepless nights is priceless. I am so grateful for you sharing it with the group who's been here today and those who will watch this down the road. So I just want to say thanks. I am literally just going to hang up on you all. I just want to say thanks for everybody who's here. Hope you got all your questions answered, and you know where to find Elliot and myself for future questions.
Thanks for all your guidance over this whole journey.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, bye everybody. Again, I'm just going to hang up and we'll see each other online. Bye.